Welcome to a brand new video. My name is Arfat, and today we will be discussing about one of the most important figure in Christianity, and that is the Apostle Paul. There's many books written out there about the Apostle Paul, and I don't claim to have read every one of them, or even a handful of them. There's basically hundreds of literatures written about the Apostle Paul. But there's one book here today that I wish to talk about, and I don't think that you will get a complete knowledge about the Apostle Paul if you have not read, obviously, the letters of Paul, the commentaries, and so forth. But there's also one book in particular by a Pauline scholar, if you want to call it that has written a book that is about 800 pages long, and it is basically a concise commentary of Paul's undisputed letters. I will explain this. But this book is Epistles, Paul, basically Paul, and the subtitle is The Apostles' Life, Letters, and Thoughts. This is one of the best books about Paul that I've read. In comparison to this, there's another book by Professor Paula Fredrickson called Paul, the Pagan Apostle. And I believe that book is fantastic as well. No doubt I enjoy reading it. But if you want a very comprehensive take about Paul, this book should actually be titled Introduction to Paul, in a sense. Because that's literally what it is. It's an introduction to Paul's life. This is by Fortress Press, meaning it is a scholarly work. But no doubt, this is easy to read. That's what you get from E.P. Saunders. I have tons of books from E.P. Saunders, by E.P. Saunders. And this is my favorite from him. Even though it is very long, very thick, I spend a lot of time with this book because some pages or some chapters I reread again, because especially on the Corinthians, the second Corinthians, I'll get to this. I'll summarize the entire Pauline epistles in this video. Okay, I don't care how long this video will be, but I try to make it very brief. But this book is fantastic. There's a lot of rave reviews here. Okay, fantastic book. Paula Fredrickson, okay, reviewed this book. Yeah, E.P. Saunders is now retired, I believe. He doesn't teach anymore professionally, but I could be mistaken completely. But again, this guy is very brilliant. This guy is one of the smartest, in fact, one of the greatest New Testament scholar of our era, of our century. He is definitely up there amongst the great. Okay, very distinguished person. You can actually tell so much about his knowledge if you read his book, especially about this. He argues a lot, and he pointed out why some scholars, even though he doesn't mention who they are, but he mentioned that some scholars are mistaken and they have interpreted Paul in a different way, but this is what I think about Paul, and this is why I believe it is correct, especially the chapters on Galatians. Okay, did Paul travel in North Galatia or in South Galatia? Which one is it? Okay, it is a very interesting discussion here, back and forth. And he goes into the history of Galatia, what was it before, and so on and so forth. And there's 2 appendixes to this as well. And the way I did it was that I followed through the whole epistle narrative, and then only I read the appendix. But what I should have done if I reread this book again, which I will, is that I will, when it comes to the appendixes, for example, the chapters on Galatians, it is better that you read the appendix first, because the appendix gives you a history or the background of what Galatia is, or where Galatia is, and what the history of that place. And so when you read the chapters on Galatians with the historical context at the back of your head, it's easy for you to understand. And so that is what I should have done, rather than going from page 1 to the appendix. Um, yeah, so let me just summarize the entire Pauline epistles, the undisputed epistles. By the way, there's no Philemon in here because Philemon is a very short chapter. It is basically a letter that Paul wrote to his runaway slaves, one called Onesimus, and so I don't know how it's pronounced actually, Onesimus, okay. But basically it is Paul wrote to Philemon, apparently the master of the slave, Onesimus, and that slave had run away for whatever reason, and so now that slave, if you read some commentaries, it says that person must have done something wrong. Okay, some commentaries I've read stolen the money, and then that Onesimus now regrets. Okay. So he ran to Paul in prison. Now, this is an interesting discussion. Where was Paul in prison? If you read Raymond Brown's Introduction to the New Testament, he believed that Ephesus is actually the correct place. Okay, he believed, okay, but we do not know. Acts never tells us. Pauline epistles, the undisputed and the disputed, never tells us where exactly. But Ephesus is the much proper place because it is so near Galatia. Okay, it is near very. It is about, I don't know how, it's not that far compared to Rome, and also compared to what's the one other place? I can't remember. Was it Syria? I can't remember. Yeah, this book is jam-packed with information. But one thing I really like about this book is that the print size, and the print size is actually large. If you look at it, it has big print size, and this is very, very helpful because I work 8 to 5, and by the time I got home, the sun has already set. Sun has already set, and so I depend on my fluorescent light, and so it is easy for the eyes. I don't wear glasses, but So back to letter to Philemon. The reason why it is not in this book is because it's very short, and so basically the whole summary of the story is that Onesimus was a runaway slave, and Paul wrote to Philemon. Apparently, Paul had evangelized Philemon, converted Philemon in a sense to Christianity, quote unquote Christianity, and so now Paul is saying that free Onesimus, because Onesimus is also your Christian brethren now. He used to be your slave, but no doubt he had accepted the gospel, the good news, and so you should free him from his slave. You should make him your Adelphoi, your brother, okay? And also, if you could, I'll be coming towards you, I hope, and so prepare for me a room. Or the other place was Philippi. It was Paul in prison in Philippi, in a sense. And so, so basically Paul wrote to Philemon asking for Onesimus to be freed. And also if Philemon is good enough or kind-hearted to actually send Philemon on Paul's missionary journeys to aid the spread of the gospel. So that, in a nutshell, is a letter to the Philemon, and a lot of scholars believe that it is an authentic Pauline epistle. We will begin with that out of the way. So we will begin with 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians is an undisputed Pauline letters. Okay, all the letters that I'll be speaking about by Paul is undisputed, but even though some parts of the letters are disputed as to its composition, like the hymns in Philippi, for example, Philippians. Okay, we will get to that in a sense. But 1 Thessalonians was the very first epistle that Paul actually wrote, according to most scholars, that we have survived in the New Testament. Who knows, okay, how many letters Paul wrote, or what is the first Pauline letters that he wrote. Basically, we do not have access to it. So, according to Paula Fredrickson and Episanders as well, agrees that this is written probably around the late 40s to the early 50s, even though the dating is more towards the early 50s, 52, 48 to 52, 54, in a sense, 52, 53 in a sense. When was this written? Was it in the first missionary journey, second missionary journey, third missionary journey? The answer is we don't know, because Paul never mentions different missionary journeys. Where scholars get these different missionary journeys, 1, 2, and third missionary journeys, is from the book of Acts. Okay. But if you read Pauline's epistle without using Acts, okay, basically we don't know. And this is the approach that I would take in this video. Okay. Because a lot of scholars believe that Acts is not a historical account. So we should be careful when we use Acts, although we can use certain parts of it, but to take it as a whole, we have to be careful with it, because it is not a historical account, even though it contains historical moments in it. Okay, but I will not use Acts because this is a very short video, and I don't want to go back and forth between Pauline epistles and Acts and explain the different thing. So we will just easily just throw Acts out of the window for today's video. Okay, so basically we do not know when where Paul wrote the First Thessalonians from, possibly from Corinth. Okay, but again, we don't use Acts. We mostly will never know. It could be writing on everywhere. Okay. First Thessalonians is unity in a sense, whereby from chapter 1 all the way to the last chapter, it is written in one sitting. That is the opinion of some scholars. Some other scholars believe that there are portions of it that have been interpolated. But in most scholars, and I will take the opinion of most scholars in this video, that First Thessalonians is a unity letter, meaning it's written from start to finish. What is the content about? Basically, briefly, when Paul preached to the Thessalonians, people in Thessaloniki, Thessalonica, when Paul came there, he basically converted them, okay, or he preached to them according to Acts. He preached in the gospel. Okay, we'll leave Acts aside. But if you read Pauline's letters, he set up shop. He set up a tent shop, and then he preached to the Thessalonians. And so when Paul left Thessalonians, some people came and disturbed the place and so on and so forth, according to some commentaries. But the gist of the message is that the Thessalonians have been taught by Paul that they will not die. Okay, basically the end of times is near. They will not die. Okay, before they die, they will see Jesus, and they will be saved. But then when Paul left Thessalonica and he went to Corinth, apparently he received news, okay, that the Thessalonians wrote to him that people had died. And so they're starting to get panic in a sense. Okay? And so they wanted to know what's going on. Paul taught me that I will not die, but people now are dying, and Jesus hasn't come yet. The parousia is not here. Okay, the end of time is not here. And so Paul, he urgently wrote back to the Thessalonians and say that, oh, hold on a minute, some of you might have died, but don't worry. When Jesus come, when the parousia come, they will be the first to be lifted up. Okay, and then you will be lifted up. Those who are alive will be lifted up after those who have died. Okay, and just to calm them, to calm the Thessalonians down. So that is the gist of the message of First Thessalonians. Now, what is the second letter that Paul wrote that we have in the New Testament? Possibly First Corinthians. But again, this is all disputed. Galatians could be as well. Um, the approach that I would take is that after the first Thessalonians, Galatians was actually the letter that Paul wrote, because it contains quite similar events whereby in Galatia, in the letter to the Galatians, Paul, the underlying message was that missionaries from elsewhere have come, or possibly even the Galatians themselves have stirred this up, according to Raymond Brown. But according to most opinion of scholars and commentaries that I've read, was that people from elsewhere, okay, maybe some people say in Jerusalem, so on and so forth, Apollos, all these things, but we do not have concrete evidence, so it's best to say that we don't know. But apparently missionary people from somewhere came that has more Jewish understanding in a sense, and told the Galatians that, hey, you have been deceived by Paul. Paul taught you that you do not need to get circumcised, okay, but Jesus was circumcised. And so Paul is preaching you something that is mistaken in a sense. And so because of this, the Galatians, they stir up things, okay, and then Paul heard about this, and Paul became absolutely angry. Possibly he was in Corinth as well when he wrote the Galatians, letter to the Galatians. Again, we don't, he could be on the way to somewhere, who knows, yeah. But the more popular opinion was that he was already in a place, and then either Timothy or Titus came, okay, and then gave him the news or the letters, okay, and then Paul wrote, and then they go back to where they are supposed to be. And so when Paul wrote Galatians, he was very angry with the Galatians. He said, what have deceived you people? Yeah, Paul was really, really strong in his language. He never even gave them a quote-unquote welcome message. Okay, at one stage he wrote that hopefully when you get circumcised, the knife will slip and then will cut off your that part of your foreskin. And so he wrote all these kinds of language. What have deceived you, O Galatians? Okay. And Paul says that you do not need to get circumcised. Okay, and then he goes into all these analogies that I do not have time to discuss in this video. But basically that is the message of Galatians. Paul was very angry because some other people, just as he was in Thessalonians. Okay, but the relationship was that in First Thessalonians, the understanding was, because a lot of scholars believe this, okay, and if I remember correctly, E.P. Sanders mentioned little bit about this as well in his chapter on Thessalonians, whereby the Thessalonians were pagans, okay, meaning they were converted, okay, they were converted to Pauline Christianity, okay, to Paul's understanding of the message of the good news, okay. And so and according to a lot of scholarly opinion, Paul did not convert Jews to a kind of Pauline Christianity. Paul mostly convert Gentiles, okay, and not because I've heard some people say that Paul also converted Jews into Christianity, but the more popular opinion was that the Jamesonian church, okay, quote unquote church, even though they preach in synagogues, but I'll just use church because church is basically like a gathering, okay, so a group of people, missionaries even, and so the Jamesonian church was the one, okay, quote unquote church, was the one who actually converted the Jews to a form of Judaism that Jesus brought, because Jesus brought Judaism. It is not correct to say that Jesus brought Christianity. Okay, it is Jesus was a Jew, and so we have to be careful in the way we use these terminologies here. Even though a lot of Christians today would believe that Jesus brought Christianity to them, But this is absolutely foreign. This is actually false, even though it is a popular opinion, but it is actually not true, because Jesus brought with himself, Jesus, if you read the gospel, is very clear. Jesus go to the synagogue and preach in the synagogue. Gentiles don't preach in the synagogue, even though in the diaspora and even in Jerusalem, they still go to the synagogues to hear the Torah being recited. Okay, Episanders confirm this. The Torah is still being recited in the synagogues, and you will have Gentiles. They will listen to stories. Okay, but they don't go into the holiest place in the synagogues. It's just like when non-Muslim enter a mosque, they don't go into the quote-unquote the place of the imam. Okay, some mosques do not allow you to go into the musalla, okay, the place where the prayers are held, if you are not if you have not engaged in ritual washing, wudu. Even in synagogues sometimes, okay, Jews will have this. They make wudu as well. They have ritual washing. Okay, they kept cleanliness. And so, if you are a foreigner, or if you are not Jews, or if you are not a Muslim, then certain mosques will stop you from entering the holy of holies, quote unquote, even though it doesn't exist anymore in a synagogue. But the place where basically the imam makes salah, okay, recited, lead the prayer. Okay, you can still enter the prayer hall, but you cannot, stand at the imam's spot. Okay, in a sense. Yeah. So anyway, where was I? Yeah, the Galatians. And so Galatians is that it was the gist of the message. Okay, Paul was crossed by a certain missionaries that have more Jewish background. That is the popular opinion. Whereas some other opinion was that these missionaries were Gentiles themselves. Okay, but then they are probably Gnostics. Okay, but I believe this opinion is reading back anachronistically, because Gnostics were only popular around the same time the Gospel of John was written, 1995 to 100 CE and above. But that doesn't mean that Gnosticism don't exist, because we all know it takes time for an idea to bloom. It takes centuries. Okay, yeah. So after Galatians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, it could be Philippians. We do not basically know. Philippians is somehow the to me, okay, Philippians is a very interesting letter. I will not go through the content of Philippians because it's a very short book. You can read it yourself. But I would like to discuss more about the if you want to call it, the literary themes in there. Basically, is Philippians one whole letter that Paul wrote? According to majority of the scholarly opinion, is that it is actually not. Even though Raymond Brown, and I would disagree with Raymond Brown with this, because a lot of scholars have given a much better evidence, okay, to this. But Raymond Brown believed that this is actually a unity letter, and his main argument was that you find hymns, okay, because the let me just explain. Majority of scholars believe that Philippians was actually two letters combined into one. The hymns is separate. It's just like the hymn or the prologue to the Gospel of John and the first epistle of John, okay, the prologue in there. A lot of scholars believe that these were added later on. But Raymond Brown's main argument was that the manuscripts that came with, he presents two evidence. The first one is that the manuscripts that we have, the earliest ones, okay, came with the hymns, okay. And his second argument was that you found hymns everywhere, okay, in the writings of the New Testament and the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Okay. A lot of scholars disagree with this. The first point, okay, the scholars replied to was that our earliest manuscripts of John as well as Philippians was centuries. And what could have happened in those few centuries? Yeah, they could have been added on. And the hymns here, if you read it for yourself, you'll know as well. If you read it carefully, the hymns here contains parts that just don't match it's just like taking Episander's book and then taking Giza Vermesh's book. Okay, even though they could be discussing about the same topic, but you know that this is Giza Vermesh's work and this is Episander's work. If you've read both of their literature, you'll know that this cannot be Episander's and this cannot be Giza Vermesh. If you mix them together, you'll know that there's something wrong with the text here, because it is just not right. And so this is the argument of certain scholars. And when I read it as well, I can't say that I really can tell, but once the scholars explain and once I really go back, okay, again, this is why you read scholarly works, and you can always remember what they say and then see it for yourself. And so when I do that, when I think about that as well, I'm convinced in a sense. Yeah, so Philippians, even though Raymond Brown is, to me, a very great scholar, I think he got this one mistaken, because there's a stronger opinion from a body of distinguished scholar, okay, that actually say different things than what Professor Brown, the late Professor Brown, did. But to be fair, the main answer is Raymond Brown himself does not know. Okay, again. But yeah, so Philippians is the Philippians. You can read for yourself. There's really no need for me to go through the letter. It's not that long. It's very short. And so after Philippians, Corinthians, because a lot of scholars believe that Romans was actually the final letter that Paul wrote. Romans, the letter to the Romans, is huge to discuss. There's many topics, but the topic is very similar to Galatians, and that is why some of the scholars put Galatians before Romans. Yeah. And I don't mind taking that opinion as well. But there's also another body of scholars that put Galatians after Thessalonians, and I'm more convinced that that is actually the right place. But again, we don't know, basically. But Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, 1st Corinthians is a lot to discuss as well. The Corinthians correspondence as well as the letter to the Romans, these two are huge. Okay, 800 pages commentaries have been written about them. Thousands of commentaries, pages on commentaries have been dedicated to them. And so I will definitely not be able to do justice here, even 1% of it. But what I can say is that 1st Corinthians, the main issue was that people have been divided. Okay, some say that I support Apollos, I support Paul, I support Peter. Okay, and so there's different camps here. Okay, and these camps seems to clash with one another and say that Paul is the most superior apostle, or Apollos is the most superior apostle, no, Peter is the most superior apostle, so everyone should follow my church, okay, quote unquote church. Okay, but when Paul heard about this, he wrote to the Corinthians and said that, hold on a minute, this is false, Jesus Christ, okay, Christ Jesus is actually the one that you all should follow. Okay, it is very interesting here that Paul doesn't elevate himself, because he knew that some people supported him, but instead of saying that, oh, you should follow my gospel, okay, but instead he said that everyone should follow Christ Jesus, okay, everyone should follow him, believe in him, okay. And so there's many message to Corinthians, people sleeping with their stepmom, okay, people does have problems during the meals, okay, and so all these I will not have time to discuss. I wish I would. um, I'll dedicate a future video to this. So Second Corinthians is very interesting. Second Corinthians, like Philippians, my approach will not be on the narrative, okay, because again, even though it's a slightly longer letter, but you can read it for yourself. But Second Corinthians, what I'm interested in discussing is the unity of the letter. According to scholars like Philemon, he says that there's at least 2 to 5 letters that have been combined together to become 2 Corinthians. But in Professor Ullman's textbook, Introduction to the New Testament, he take the approach whereby there's only, as if it is only 2 letters being combined into one. But E.P. Saunders explore this in his huge chapter to the Corinthians, okay, huge chapter, really needed. But again, even this is absolutely brief in a sense. But he laid it down so clearly. He showed you which passage is not authentic, so on and so forth. Not authentic in a sense whereby it is not authentic to 2 Corinthians. It is a different letter that have been matched together to form 2 Corinthians. So my approach, because this is a very brief approach, I would take it as if there's only 2 letters that have been combined, and that is chapter 1 to 9 and chapter 10 to 13. Chapter 10 to 13 supposedly was written first before chapter 1 to 9. Okay, because apparently the background here is that, again, the Corinthians have been deceived, okay? And so apparently when certain missionary came, say that, okay, Paul, yada, da, 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 and so Paul was embarrassed. Okay, he was embarrassed, and so he left Corinth. Because apparently these missionaries, they can speak very fluently, okay, be it whether in Hebrew or whatever, they could basically preach fluently. And Paul, he maybe started in his words, and so he is not as fluent as these missionaries, and so he was, he was embarrassed, and so he left Corinth. Okay, again, this is just one commentary, just one story. There are many different interpretations of this. It's just one of it. So when Paul left Corinth, because he was embarrassed, he was so angry, he wrote them the letter. Okay, he scolded them, in a sense, quote unquote scolded. And this is the letter that he wrote, found in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 to 13. Okay, this is the angry letter. Scholars call this the angry letter of Corinthians. Okay, when scholars say that, they are referring to chapter 10 to 13. Now, apparently, after a while, Paul heard that the Corinthians, they have gone back, okay, to Paul's teaching, and so a certain person, was punished, quote unquote, and then he returned back. Okay, the Corinthians have dealt with this person, and now when Paul heard about this, he was relieved, and so he wrote them a quote unquote happy letter, okay, thanking them, so on and so forth. And this is the letters that we found in chapter 1 to 9. Okay, chapter 7 and 8, according to some scholars, is not the, if I remember correctly, is not. It is basically the portions whereby Paul says that he needs to go to collect money, and this is what you should do with the money that have been collected for the Jerusalem church. This could be an instruction that was written to Philemon, I can't remember, it's Timothy or Titus, either one of his missionaries, one of his disciples actually. This is probably a private letter, okay, that telling his disciples that, okay, this is what you should do with the money. Okay, and so this could be another letter added on. Okay, so let's move on to Romans. This video is already too long. So Romans is, the background context was that Paul was in Corinth, again, or it could be in Ephesus. It depends on, the thing about this is there's no unity in scholars. There's many different opinions from many prominent, distinguished scholars. So as a lay reader, lay person like me, it is really hard to you can only go based on the evidence that they presented. And what do you do when both evidence are very convincing? You stick to the middle path and say you don't know. So this is my approach here. There is no one opinion, even though there's majority of distinguished scholars that say, probably written from Corinth, or before he goes to Jerusalem he wrote this. But where was he before he goes to Jerusalem? If we don't use the book of Acts, okay, obviously if we use the book of Acts, it will be clearer to us. But my approach in this video is to throw away Acts out of the window, and this is probably a mistake. But because Acts is, we don't know which part is historical, which part is not historical, even though there are great opinions by scholars. But if we don't take Acts as if we don't use Acts here, okay, we will basically say we don't know. And so this is the approach for this video. And so apparently before Paul goes to Jerusalem, he wrote letters to the Romans. He sent them to Rome. And when he was in Jerusalem, before he finished writing the letters to the Romans, he somehow knew that he will die. Okay, he will be beaten up in Jerusalem or whatever. He will go on trial. So he's prepared to meet Jesus in the parousia, so on and so forth. Okay, apparently the Romans had heard that Paul preached a different kind of message that is very different to what Jewish missionaries actually preach. And so the Romans have a bad image of Paul. And so Paul must have heard about this. And so he wrote to the Romans saying that, okay, this is what my beliefs are. Okay, this is me. This is what I believe. Okay, whatever you've heard about me, it's actually not true. Even though he doesn't really mention this, but this is what scholars assume might have happened. And so when he wrote letters to the Romans, he believed that, okay, he wants to spread the gospel to Spain, further west. Okay, even though he doesn't really mention Spain, but scholars believe that further west from Italy, or the west of Italy, Spain, okay, towards the end of the world, because in the ancient world they believe that that place is the end of the world. Okay, this is according to interpretation of some historians, some scholars. And so when Paul wrote the letters to the Romans, he emphasized, that he changed his mind somehow in Galatians, that you do not need the law, you do not need to be circumcised. But in letters to the Romans, he says that you still need works. Okay, you still need to work. You still need to do this, and even though you believe and accept Jesus died for your sins, but you also need to work. Okay, and because I work as well, according to Paul. And so when he was in Jerusalem, okay, according to the book of Acts, okay, even though I say I do not want to use Acts, but this is where the Pauline narrative ends. Okay, we know what happened only from the book of Acts. Okay, but the book of Acts portrays Paul landing in Rome after a shipwreck, and then he stayed there for 2 years. What happened after that? We go to the patristic letters, okay, Clement, first Clement, I believe, or was it Eusebius? I can't remember, but early patristic sources indicates that Eusebius indicates, and he quotes early patristic sources that states that Paul and Peter died in Rome. Okay, but there's no evidence from the New Testament that says this as well. According to the dating of Eusebius, even though his dating is a bit jumbled up, but Paul and Peter probably died in the 60s, and Nero was the emperor of Rome in the mid 60s, and according to Eusebius as well, there was a persecution of Christian in Rome. Okay, not the entire Roman Empire, just in Rome and certain pockets here and there. And so that is what happened to Peter and Paul. The background of the Romans was that Paul never convert the Romans. Okay, I don't believe Paul actually landed in Rome, to be honest with you. The wee passages in Acts, I don't think it is historical, and this is the opinion of Professor Dale Martin as well. And Dale Martin has a very strong opinion on this, and he presents evidence, so on and so forth. Read his book, New Testament, History and Literature, I believe that's what it's called. Green book, published by Yale University Press. The Green book, can't remember what title it is, but he has a very strong opinion on this. But anyway, this book is about Epicandus, Paul. I really recommend you this book. Take your time reading this. If you're not used to reading scholarly works, this is massive. This is absolutely massive. Spend a month, 2 months, 3 months. I spent about a month with this, just this alone, because I really want to understand. Because Epicandus is, I believe, one of the greatest Pauline scholars. He knows what he's talking about. Okay, he more than knows. If you read his work, you know that he is so good in early Christianity, Judaism, and the Jewish law. He is fantastic in this topic, especially Paul. Okay, Paul was a Jew. Okay, Paul wasn't a Christian. Paul, the word Christian don't even exist in Paul's mind. Okay, people say that the book of Acts say that the first Christian is called in Syria, so on and so forth. But the book of Acts was written later than Paul. The book of Acts was probably written 90, around the same time as this Gospel of John. And so, when Acts provide a narrative about Paul, the author Luke was actually referring to materials that came after Paul possibly died. Okay, Luke, according to most scholars, never met the author Luke that wrote the Gospel and Acts. Never met Paul. So the wee passages here that we found in Acts, 3 wee passages, 3 times it is mentioned. Those are probably used. Those are sources, possibly the historical Luke, okay, travel with Paul, and then the author of Luke have access to this material, and so he chop, he cut and paste, and he included in the book of Acts. But a lot of scholars believe that the book of Acts is not historical, because if you read Pauline's undisputed and disputed letters, if you compare them to the book of Acts, there's many different discrepancies here. And so who is correct? Obviously, we have to go to the main source that we have, Paul. Okay? Assuming or presumably that Paul writes honestly. He doesn't distort, or his editors or the one who copied his epistles copied it honestly. Okay? Assuming, because we do not have any manuscripts from the 1st century. But anyway, it's been a long video, but it is a very interesting, hopefully it is an interesting discussion for you. And Paul by Epicandus, greatly recommend. I think I've just presented you a brief summary of his book, but yeah, I'll see you on my next video. My name is Arfad, and thanks for watching.